Now more of the Midcoast Morning Buzz with Richard and Jim. Radio 9, WCME.
Maine Yankee nuclear power plant, built in Wiscasset, began operating in 1972, provided much of Maine's electricity until 1996, decommissioned due to high repair cost in 97, and then completely deconstructed by 2004. Our guest this morning is Eric Howes, Director of Public and Government Affairs of Maine Yankee. Mr. Howes, thank you so much for coming in this morning.
Thank you, Richard.
Now, before we get into the minutia of what is happening at Maine Yankee right now, on March the 1st, a Japanese television crew came to Maine Yankee as part of a documentary for the anniversary of the Fukushima disaster that was caused by the tsunami and completely obliterated their triple reactor that's still leaking nuclear waste. How were you able to help out that film crew?
There has been a fair amount of international attention to Maine Yankee since the end of decommissioning. A couple of years ago, there was a Russian group that came. Last year, there was a French-German group that came. And this past spring, I was contacted by the what is the equivalent of Japanese public television. They were doing a large story on nuclear power in the United States, both from the from the perspective of constructing new plants, as well as the economics of nuclear power, and they were interested in looking at what we refer to as the back end of the nuclear fuel cycle, which would be a fully decommissioned plant like Maine Yankee that continues to exist only because we're storing spent nuclear fuel. And their interest in Maine Yankee is that we store our fuel in what's known as dry cask storage. This is an above-ground storage system, which is essentially large concrete overpack that contains a stainless steel canister that holds the spent nuclear fuel. The other way spent nuclear fuel is stored is in pools, such as what you've read about from Fukushima. All operating nuclear power plants have a fuel pool. Many of them also have dry cask storage. And the Japanese were interested in our experience storing fuel in dry cask because it's not widely used in Japan.
I think I'm not alone in assuming that when Maine Yankee was decommissioned and completely demolished, that all of that nuclear waste was elsewhere, out of sight, out of mind. Such is not the case. How many tons of nuclear waste is at, or should I say spent fuel rods, is at the site in Wiscasset currently?
Yeah, at Maine Yankee, we have 1,434 what are known as spent nuclear fuel assemblies. Those are the individual units that were in the reactor vessel. They make up about 550 metric tons of uranium, which is the measurement of how you determine how much fuel you have. It's measured in metric tons uranium.
Now, the storage on site was not the original plan, correct? It was supposed to go elsewhere. What happened? Where was it supposed to go, and why didn't it?
Right. Yeah, I would like your listeners to know that the only reason we're having this conversation about Maine Yankee today, and the only reason Maine Yankee continues to exist as a company, is because the federal government has failed to meet its obligations to remove this material from Maine Yankee, as well as every other commercial nuclear power plant in the country. By contract, as well as under what's known as the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, people who benefit from the generation of nuclear power pay into what's known as the Nuclear Waste Fund for the disposal of this material. And it's the government's obligation under contract and law to remove this material, which they were to have begun at the end of January in 1998. So we're 15 years beyond the time when the federal government was to remove this material. The government had been looking at a site in Nevada called Yucca Mountain for geologic disposal and had invested considerable money in this site from the Nuclear Waste Fund, and it's probably the most studied piece of real estate on Earth. The Obama administration decided that there must be a better way to do this than Yucca Mountain, and has tried to withdraw the license application for Yucca Mountain, and in fact appointed a Blue Ribbon Commission on America's Nuclear Future, which studied the issue for 2 years to recommend new ideas for closing what's known as the back end of the fuel cycle. One of the recommendations that they made, which we find encouraging, is that because a geologic repository may be decades away, they recommend that the country develop one or more what are known as centralized interim storage facilities, which would look much like the Maine Yankee site except on a larger scale. And the idea would be for one or more of these to be located in a volunteer host community, and the site would be chosen through what's known as a consent-based siting process, which is only now being defined. And we were pleased in January that the Department of Energy issued a strategy report that echoes this. Most importantly, Both the Blue Ribbon Commission and the Department of Energy recommend that the priority should be given to the removal of spent nuclear fuel from shutdown sites like Maine Yankee. There are 12 of these sites in the country, and it makes economic sense, and it makes sense from an equity perspective for communities for this fuel to be moved on a priority basis.
If you're just joining us, we're talking with Eric Howes, and Eric, you're the one to go through your rather lengthy title again at Maine Yankee. What is that exactly?
I'm the Director of Public and Government Affairs at Maine Yankee.
And is it fair to say that all you just explained, and we appreciate your detail in explaining it, all of this long litany of details about delays in removing the waste has in fact to do with the ongoing reality that it is concern and unanswered questions about the nature of nuclear waste that are effectively holding up the development of nuclear power in this nation and elsewhere in the world, right?
Well, when it comes to nuclear material, spent nuclear fuel, and the disposal of nuclear waste, it's well understood from a technical perspective how to do this. We're storing it safely around the country as we speak. We know how to dispose of it. The issue is a political one rather than a technical one. In Nevada, Yucca Mountain has been largely stymied because Senator Harry Reid, who is the senator from Nevada and also the majority leader in the United States Senate, has made it his signature issue that Yucca Mountain will not move forward, even though it continues to be the law of the land. And so far, he's managed to accomplish that. There is no funding for the program. The program effectively doesn't exist. And so this Blue Ribbon Commission was chartered to come up with alternative recommendations.
Well, with all due respect to the senator, I think anybody come out and say, not in my backyard. It's your nuclear waste in Maine. You deal with it, even though it has been paid for and even though there was a government mandate to dispose of it, putting the onus on Nevada. Even though that was a proposed site, you might want to give him some leeway on that.
Well, under federal law, the Yucca Mountain site was chosen, ratified by the Congress, and approved by the President. So it does continue to be the law of the land. Now, it's interesting that you say, not in my backyard. As I mentioned earlier, the Department of Energy is recommending a consent-based process where volunteer host communities would step forward to volunteer to host this material. There actually are communities in this country, probably I'm aware of maybe half a dozen states that have an interest in hosting this because there would be research and development associated with it. There would be other economic incentives associated with it. For example, the area around Carlsbad, New Mexico, has been very outspoken about their desire to host a facility like this.
I just want to clarify one thing, though. It's your position then, and I don't want to get into a nuclear debate here, but it's your position that we know how to safely dispose of nuclear waste. But it's certainly a fact that you have some notable nuclear scientists who are yet to be convinced of that.
Oh, there are plenty of people in the country who do not support nuclear power, and this isn't a question of whether you support nuclear power or not. This is a question of how does the nation responsibly deal with the growing legacy of stranded spent nuclear fuel.
Yeah, but there are some nuclear scientists who would quarrel with the notion that we know how to safely dispose of nuclear waste.
I wouldn't argue with that.
Okay.
You explained how it's stored in canisters. Safety-wise, for security, national security purposes, is this the type of material that can be stolen and used for nefarious purposes as a low-grade, dirty bomb, for example? Do you have that kind of security down there as well to protect that?
Yeah. Maine Yankee is regulated by the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and we have an approved security plan as part of our license. And really, beyond that, I really can't speak to it.
I see. Now, this may sound like a dumb question, but just look at me. Oh, there you go. Is there any...
We ask those once in a while in the morning.
Well, no, and again, I'm sure I'm not the only one who's ever thought. I mean, we know.
I wasn't aware I was on camera.
We know how to make something radioactive to the point where it will never be not radioactive 250 million years or so. Is there any attempt to take the radioactivity out of this material? Is there any sort of process, any research being done to neutralize these rods?
I'm not a scientist, and I don't know. I mean, there are countries that reprocess spent nuclear fuel, that remove the still usable uranium and reconstitute it and reuse it, but I'm really not familiar with that.
I'm just thinking, like, all the years that we've heard about this, we can make something hot, but we can't cool it down. That's the best you can do?
Again, I'm not the scientist.
Okay. Our guest today has been Eric House. He's the Director of Public and Government Affairs at Maine Yankee. Eric, thank you so much for coming in. I'm sure this is an issue that's not going to go away for some time, and hopefully we'll have you back on again.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Radio 9 WCME.